So you may have heard about some of the scandals surrounding the YouTube star David Dobrik and the various members of the Vlog Squad, the content creator collective that he's a part of. In this video, we're going to focus a little bit on the scandal involving Durte Dom and whether or not the responsibility can be extended to David Dobrik somehow. Coming up on Legal Bytes. Hey everyone, welcome to Legal Bytes. I'm Alyte, I'm a lawyer, and on this channel we explain the law one bite at a time. So if you don't know, David Dobrik is a huge YouTube star. He has millions of subscribers and he's part of the collective, the Vlog Squad, which is a rotating door of YouTube creators, each of which have really big followings in their own right. I personally don't follow this type of content, so I've had to do a little bit of catching up myself. I guess the best way to describe their content is that they do a lot of pranks and otherwise a lot of videos that have some sort of a surprise element to them. So even though the Vlog Squad seems to be sort of this amorphous group of content creators that revolves in and out of the group, it seems like one of the main central pieces is David Dobrik. And there are a handful of other members that are considered core to the group, including a content creator who goes by Durte Dom, whose real name is Dominykas Zeglaitis. He's a Lithuanian American. I'm also a Lithuanian American. If you don't know how to pronounce his name, that's how you pronounce it. Anyway, recently there was an insider article where a woman who went by the pseudonym Hannah accused Durte Dom of raping her after she became intoxicated to the point of blacking out and passing out. Apparently it happened at a Vlog Squad function or at some sort of a gathering where there was an understanding that they were all going to be creating content together. Obviously this is a really serious subject and a very sensitive one as well. And before I move on, I want to say that the intent of this video is not to give any sort of blame or any sort of shame or to advocate or defend anyone on any side of this issue. Rather, the intent here is to take a look from a legal perspective to determine whether or not responsibility can be shared. And part of that is because there really are two different types of courts here. There's a court of law and there's the court of public opinion. Obviously, there are a lot of different opinions surrounding this issue and there's a lot of emotion. It's a very emotionally charged matter. And truth be told, although the purpose of law is to guide human behavior, there are times when it doesn't necessarily regulate human behavior in ways that we would want it to. But there are obviously other consequences outside of a court of law. And notably, David Dobrik has been seeing that recently. He's lost a lot of sponsorships and his reputation has really plummeted. But there are plenty of other people that can comment on that kind of stuff. So let's move on and see what the law says. Now, first off, in a situation like this, there is the possibility of looking at this through a criminal law lens and a civil law lens. And that's because there are potential crimes that may have happened here. But what I'm going to do is take a look at it from a civil law aspect and say that if we were to assume that a case is made against Durte Dom for the underlying activity, can that same liability be somehow extended over to David Dobrik? So to start, the Vlog Squad is operating out of California. So it looks like California law is what's going to be applying here. So under the law, generally speaking, you're not responsible for the misdeeds of another person. There has to be some sort of a special relationship between you and that other person in order for their liability to extend to you. Now, there's one way that liability could potentially extend, and that's through vicarious liability, specifically called respondeat superior. And that's where there's some sort of an employment relationship between the two actors. Specifically, where there is an employee-employer relationship, the employee's liability can be extended to the employer if that employee is acting within the scope of their employment at the time that the liability arose. So in just a second, we'll get into whether or not there was an employment relationship. But if we were to assume that there was, first you'd have to show that whatever it is that Durte Dom did was within the scope of his employment for David Dobrik. Now, usually something like sexual assault happens outside of the workplace and outside of the employer's control. In this case, however, it seems like the event happened at a Vlog Squad party or a gathering, and it looks like the whole purpose of that gathering was to create content for YouTube. Now, on top of that, apparently Durte Dom had this character or this persona in a lot of videos where he was a sex addict or he put himself into those sort of situations fairly often in his videos. I personally think that all of that would tend to support the idea that he was acting within the scope of his employment if he was thinking that they were creating content for YouTube and he was acting within that sort of character or persona during this party. Now, moving on to whether or not there actually is this employer-employee relationship. When you look at the situation, at first glance, you think these are all independent creators. They're all sort of independent contractors in their own right. However, there's a little bit of information that we don't know, and there's some information that we can add based on what we know about the laws in California. First is what we don't know, but can probably reasonably guess at. First off, like I said before, all of these content creators have very large followings. It's not unreasonable to guess that they have certain corporate entities involved here. Particularly, I wouldn't be surprised if the Vlog Squad itself had its own corporate entity. Also, I wouldn't be surprised if they had contracts for agreements that they make behind the scenes for work agreements or revenue sharing or anything like that. One thing that is clear is that David Dobrik's attorney said that all content creators that are involved in these videos are signing consent waivers. Now, admittedly, I haven't seen all of the interviews from the various members of the Vlog Squad talking about all of these different scandals, but the impression that I've gotten is that David Dobrik has been pretty much the person in charge of this whole endeavor, and that he asserts a certain level of control over it. Now, here's what California employment law has to say about these kinds of employment relationships. Several years ago, there was a case called Dynamex where the California Supreme Court basically overhauled the way that courts are supposed to look at whether someone is an employee or an independent contractor. Not long after that, the California legislature codified that law into statutory law, basically further reinforcing it. So this test that was put out in the Dynamex case is called the ABC test. To start, courts default by identifying the person as an employee, and then it has to be proven that the person is actually an independent contractor. In order to prove that someone is an independent contractor as opposed to an employee, they have to meet 3 elements, hence why it's called an ABC test. First, the worker has to be free from the control and direction of the hiring entity for the performance of the work, both under contract and in fact. Second, the worker has to be performing work that's outside of the usual scope of business of the hiring entity. And finally, the worker has to be engaged in an independently established trade, occupation, or business of the same nature as the work that's performed for the hiring entity. Looking at the first requirement, it doesn't necessarily need to be that the hiring entity is controlling the precise manner or details of the work. For example, where a company is hiring work-at-home knitters or sewers, but providing them with a specific pattern to perform the work, courts have found that that's enough control to establish an employer-employee relationship. On the other hand, where a company is working on a particular project, let's say a construction company, and they hire a certain specialist that works on historical reproductions. If that specialist sets their own schedule, they work without any sort of supervision, they use their own materials, and otherwise declined an offer of employment by the hiring entity, that person has been found to be an independent contractor. So in this case, it's not entirely clear without direct testimony from various members of the Vlog Squad as to how much control that David may have had over the various members. So in this case, there would need to be evidence showing that David Dobrik is essentially directing these bids and asserting some sort of control over what Durte Dom is doing. It wouldn't necessarily need to be that he's forcing him to do it, but if he has some sort of a veto power as to where a particular video might go, that could be enough to satisfy this requirement. So moving on to the second requirement. So with Durte Dom being a regular on the Vlog Squad, it seems like this element is likely to be met. Examples of where courts have found that a certain work is outside of the scope, meaning that the person is more likely to be an independent contractor as opposed to an employee, are certain specific situations. An example of where courts have found that certain work was performed outside of the usual course of a hiring entity's business includes things like where there's been a water leak in a building and they hire an outside plumber, or when the electricity goes out and they hire an outside electrician just for a very temporary job. But where a hiring entity regularly brings in a certain worker to do work that's kind of a core function of their business, a court is likely to find that that person is an employee. One example is a bakery that's bringing in cake decorators to make custom designed cakes on a regular basis. Now in this case, like I said, Durte Dom was apparently a regular fixture. He was brought in regularly to make these videos, so I do think that this element would very likely be met. Now the third requirement would actually be a little bit more difficult to prove given the fact that Durte Dom has his own YouTube channel and he's had one for quite a while. He also has quite a following on other social media platforms, most notably Instagram. So an argument could be made that he actually does have an independently established business surrounding his influencer status and his social media profiles. But that said, that third requirement on its own is not enough to show that he's an independent contractor. In order for him to be found to be an independent contractor under this ABC test, all 3 of those have to be met. And even without full information as to the precise level of control that David Dobrik has on the other members of the Vlog Squad, that second element would be something that would actually be pretty difficult for him to get around. Now, even though they likely have contracts surrounding these various videos, this is not necessarily something that someone can contract around. Otherwise, if that were the case, many businesses in California would be regularly contracting with their employees to turn them into independent contractors. So with all of that, an argument really could be made that they actually have an employment relationship between David Dobrik and Durte Dom. And considering the fact that the incident allegedly occurred while they were actually creating content for YouTube, they even put the video up on YouTube, eventually took it down, but they put it up on YouTube. If that employment relationship is established, then that incident happened during the scope of Durte Dom's employment for David Dobrik, in which case his liability could be vicariously held to David Dobrik. Now, one last detail. Obviously, this whole analysis is predicated on the assumption that Durte Dom would be held liable for the incident. I haven't gone into the truth or the falsity of any of those allegations, and I don't intend to. But this could also be a lesson to other content creators who may be collaborating with others and may even be creating these sort of creator collectives. The world of work and social media is still very new, and there are a lot of potential legal pitfalls that people can fall into. In fact, when scandals like this come up, people may not even necessarily think of it as an employment law issue. And that's why, while just like every video on this channel is not to be taken as legal advice, it is always a good idea to educate yourself in the law so that you can minimize any sort of risks of liability. Anyway, if you enjoyed this or you at least found this interesting or informative, we'd love it if you'd hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And otherwise, if you want to see more content like this, consider hitting the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is uploaded. See you in the next video.